They called me a disgrace. When I came home in uniform, my mother sighed like I'd shown up in rags. My father once introduced me as our daughter who's still figuring things out. No one ever asked what the medals on my chest meant. They laughed at my choices, mocked my service, pretended I didn't exist at dinner parties. But then, the invitation came from the White House. I stood in full dress uniform in front of generals, senators, and the President of the United States himself. And when he stood up, saluted, and said, "This woman saved more lives than anyone in this room will ever know," my family's faces turned white. But before that moment, before the world saw who I really was, I was just Grace Whitmore, a girl with a heartbeat, a tourniquet, and a purpose. This is the story of how I went from being invisible to unforgettable. From the day I was born, my life was already planned out. My father, Charles Whitmore, was a senior partner at one of Chicago's most powerful corporate law firms. My mother, Elaine, ran a financial consulting company that advised state-level campaigns. My brother, Mason? He was already on track to clerk for a federal judge by the time I entered high school. At the Whitmore dinner table, success meant three things: perfect GPAs, Ivy League law schools, and high-profile cases. Deviating from that path was not just frowned upon, it was treated like betrayal. I wasn't a bad student. I got mostly A's, captained the debate team, even placed top 5 at a national pre-law competition, but it all felt hollow. The real moment that changed me wasn't a courtroom or a college visit, it was a car crash. We were on our way back from Mason's college visit at Yale when a truck ran a red light. I remember the impact, the shattering glass, my mother's scream. The first face I saw when I regained consciousness wasn't my parents, it was a young woman in a paramedic uniform. Calm, covered in someone else's blood, giving instructions with absolute certainty. "She's stable, pupils responsive, let's roll." That woman saved my mother's life. And, quietly, she rewired mine. I never told anyone that. I just started looking into emergency medicine, read manuals on trauma care, CPR techniques, combat field triage. When I said I wanted to study pre-med instead of pre-law, my father laughed. When I said I was considering military medicine, he stopped speaking to me for 3 days. "You want to be a nurse with a gun?" he scoffed. "Is that your great ambition now?" I applied for a medical scholarship through the Army's health professions program in secret. I got in. When I told them over dinner, the silence was louder than any scream. My mother looked at me like I'd committed a crime. My father reached for his scotch and muttered, "You've lost your mind. Mason?" He didn't even look up from his phone. No congratulations. No, "We're proud of you." Just a quiet understanding that I had, in their eyes, broken something sacred. But I wasn't trying to defy them. I was trying to be useful. I was trying to matter. 2 months later, I was at Fort Sam Houston, marching through boot camp under a sky so wide it made everything back home feel small. It was the first time I could breathe. Basic training stripped everything away: my pride, my comfort, my certainty, and I loved it. I was finally being judged for what I could do, not who my family expected me to be. Push-ups in the rain, IVs in blackout conditions, emergency protocols drilled into muscle memory. I was learning how to keep someone alive with a single needle, a calm voice, and a steady hand. By the end of advanced combat medic training, I'd been awarded top of my class for trauma response under fire simulation. My CO said I had ice in my veins and a fire in my heart. I had found my place. So I came home for Thanksgiving proud, in uniform, ribbons on my chest, my posture straighter than it had ever been. They didn't see any of it. My mom opened the door and blinked at me like I was a delivery driver. "Oh, that's what you're wearing?" Inside, the house was exactly as I remembered. Marble countertops, a grand piano no one played, glass trophies with Mason's name engraved in gold. At dinner, my father asked Mason about his summer internship with a DC firm. When Mason explained he'd met 2 senators, my dad nearly teared up. When I mentioned I'd assisted in a live surgical trauma exercise, He cut in mid-sentence to ask if anyone wanted more wine. No one asked what the ribbons meant. Mason smirked. You get those for showing up on time? My mother leaned in. So, are you just giving out band-aids? Or... I set my fork down, quietly. Last week, I stabilized a collapsed lung under field conditions in under 2 minutes. The instructors said that's close to a record. There was silence. Then Mason chuckled. Cool. So, you're basically a glorified EMT in camo. I didn't respond. I just stared at my plate, hands shaking under the table. That night, I went up to my childhood bedroom, still filled with debate trophies and college prep books, and I stared at the mirror in uniform. I wasn't angry, I was numb. How could people who loved me so deeply see me so little? When I left the next morning, no one hugged me goodbye. Back at base, I jumped into my rotation, with a fury I couldn't explain. It felt like the only place where I mattered. Where actions had meaning. Where bleeding hands and broken ribs were met with urgency, not sarcasm. Every wound I treated felt like a small reminder. You belong here. My family didn't understand what I was doing. But the soldiers under my care? They didn't just understand it. They trusted me with their lives. 6 months later, I deployed. Afghanistan, the southern province, dust storms, 120-degree heat, and a kind of tension that never let your shoulders relax. Our unit Task Force Copperlight was responsible for medical support on civilian outreach and patrols in hostile territory. We ran clinics, evacuated wounded, and sometimes got caught in hell. On my second month there, our convoy was ambushed outside a village. The lead Humvee exploded IED, 3 soldiers down. My hands moved before my brain caught up. Staff Sergeant Dunley was bleeding out from a femoral tear. I applied a tourniquet in under 20 seconds, packed the wound with QuickClot, and radioed for Medivacol while gunfire snapped over my shoulder. One bullet ripped through my sleeve, grazing my upper arm. I didn't stop. He lived. The shrapnel wound on my arm earned me a commendation medal and a Purple Heart. I didn't even tell my family. But when I returned stateside for a brief 10-day leave, the bandage was visible under my rolled-up sleeve. What happened? My mother asked casually, gesturing at the gauze. Shrapnel, during an ambush. I was treating a soldier, I said. She raised an eyebrow. And they give out medals for that? My father didn't look up from his laptop. I hope this doesn't ruin your chance at future employment. Most companies frown on physical limitations. Mason sipped his coffee. Well, at least it's not a face wound. Clients care about aesthetics. The silence after that was heavy. I thought about showing them the medal. Thought about describing what it feels like to see someone's blood soak into desert sand while you whisper, "Stay with me. Stay with me." Instead, I nodded. It's just a scratch. Later that night, I opened my email and saw a message from Sergeant Dunley's wife. She'd written, "Thank you. You gave my daughter her father back. She turned 6 last week. He was there because of you." I sat with that for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and stared out the window of my childhood room, the one lined with photos of Mason's mock trial wins. Not one photo of me in uniform. They didn't understand. But somewhere out there, a 6-year-old girl had her dad because I didn't freeze under fire. I taped that email inside my journal, next to the commendation. That was the kind of recognition that mattered. And from that moment on, I stopped asking for applause from people who'd never clap for me anyway. I didn't see it coming. 2 weeks after returning to base, I was called into the commanding officer's office. I assumed it was for reassignment or an evaluation update. Instead, the colonel handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You've been flagged for something bigger." I opened the letter. My breath caught. Selected for assessment, Tier 2, Special Operations Medical Support, Clearance Level, Provisional. That night, I sat on my bunk staring at the wall. I had heard whispers about the medics they pulled into Black Ops units, the kind of missions no one talked about, where there were no backup plans and no second chances. The training was brutal. We practiced field surgery inside moving trucks with blackout goggles on. We learned to start IVs one-handed under stress tests. We trained for chemical exposure, hostage extraction, and parachute deployment, all while managing battlefield trauma. There were only 5 of us, only one woman. But I didn't just hold my own. I thrived. 3 months later, I was assigned to Task Unit Grey Spear, a 12-person team, operating in conflict zones, classified beyond even most command chains. My role? Lead field medic. When the briefing came in, the mission was clear but chilling. Rescue 3 captured American aid workers from a remote compound in the Tarsan Mountains. Hostile forces expected. Extraction window, 72 hours. Minimal support, 0 room for error. We launched at 100 hours. 2 Black Hawks slicing through moonless sky. 15 minutes from the drop zone, disaster hit. Ground fire. Our bird took the hit. I remember the spinning, the warning sirens, the hard crash into rocky terrain, and then the silence that comes right before you hear someone scream in pain. I was dazed, my leg burning. Shrapnel. But I was breathing. And so were others. Major Park, our pilot, was pinned. Her co-pilot had a compound fracture. I moved between them, triaging with my bare hands in the dark, guided only by instinct and adrenaline. Enemy fighters were approaching. The second chopper circled overhead, unable to land under heavy fire. We were alone. I gave morphine to the injured, applied pressure to wounds. When the second medic took a bullet, I had to move between 4 wounded and keep them alive for hours. I radioed the only thing I could. Coordinates confirmed. Expect engagement. Hostiles converging. Recommend emergency airstrike immediate. Bullets cracked overhead as I fed location data to command. I didn't know then what would happen. I didn't care. My world had shrunk to the sound of the wounded breathing. If they stopped, so would I. The firefight didn't stop. For nearly 4 hours, we held our position 12 against what intel would later estimate as over 30 armed hostiles. The rocky ridge gave us slight advantage, but we were outgunned and running low on ammo. And I had 5 wounded breathing on borrowed time. Specialist Marco got shot. Sergeant Haynes collapsed lung. The pilots, still semi-conscious. Every 5 minutes, someone groaned, bled, or began to fade. Every 5 minutes, I dragged myself to a new body, hands slippery with sweat and plasma. At one point, a grenade went off near our position. My ears rang. Something hot seared through my left thigh. Shrapnel again. I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. I crawled across open dirt to reach Sergeant Bennett, who'd been flung back by the blast. His chest wasn't rising evenly. I tore open his vest, found the entry wound, and began a needle decompression using my last clean syringe. I bit down on my glove to steady myself. "Stay with me," I whispered, watching the chest rise slowly, then steadily. "You're not dying here." Captain Vega, our team leader, called over the ridge. "Mitchell, we need to move. The wounded hostiles are flanking." I fashioned stretchers from broken rotor panels and cargo netting. My hands were shaking from blood loss. My leg throbbed. Still, I lifted, pulled, hauled. We began the slow crawl eastward under cover of dark. 5 wounded, 3 semi-mobile. Me, limping, barely keeping my own balance. We moved all night through dry riverbeds, past carcasses of old villages and rusting tanks from wars long forgotten. Every half-mile, I checked pulses, reapplied gauze, gave morphine with a whisper, not a word wasted. By dawn, we reached a rise where the radio could catch signal. I used the last of our comms battery to send coordinates. An extraction chopper arrived 40 minutes later. I collapsed after loading the last stretcher, only then realizing how much blood I'd lost. I woke up in a field hospital, leg elevated, hooked to 2 bags of saline. A nurse leaned over me. "You saved 7 lives, Sergeant. Your data also helped locate the hostages. They got them out plus 19 more." My mind blurred. I only asked one question. "Did they all make it?" "Bennett didn't," she said softly. But he made it through the first night because of you. I nodded, feeling something between grief and clarity. I had given everything I could, and I would carry the rest forever. The next day, a major from intelligence debriefed me. He said the mission was now classified under Operation Hollow Echo. I would receive a Purple Heart for my injuries and a confidential commendation. But the public would never hear of what we did. And my family? They didn't even know I'd been gone. When I called home, my mother picked up. "Oh, you sound tired. Is it over now?" "Yes," I said. "Well," she sighed. "Your brother's engagement party is next weekend. If you're not too busy playing G.I. Jane, you should drop in." I returned to Fort Sam for rehabilitation, 2 months of physical therapy, scar tissue, and sleepless nights. My leg healed. The rest of me didn't. I was quieter now, efficient, focused, but something inside me had locked itself away. I went through the motions, avoided questions, and poured everything into mentoring new medics. Until the envelope arrived. It was hand-delivered by a uniformed courier, no return address. Inside, a formal letter on White House stationery. Sergeant Grace Whitmore. You are hereby invited to attend a private medal presentation ceremony at the White House. The President of the United States will confer the Distinguished Service Cross in recognition of your extraordinary valor and life-saving actions during Operation Hollow Echo. This event is confidential until the date of ceremony. Uniform required. Guests permitted. I reread it 3 times. Then again. My hand trembled, not from fear but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen. For a moment, I felt nothing but silence. Then the questions came rushing in. Do I tell my family? Do I want them there? I drafted a text, deleted it, wrote an email, erased half, walked away. In the end, I sent a single-line message. Ceremony at the White House next Thursday. Distinguished Service Cross. You're invited. Hours passed. Then a reply from my mother. We'll check our schedules. Your father has a speaking engagement. Not sure we can make it. That was it. No, congratulations. No, we're proud of you. I stared at the screen, then closed my laptop. It didn't matter. Not really. Because this time, the invitation hadn't come from them. It came from the Commander-in-Chief. The day of the ceremony, Washington bloomed under a spring sun. The East Room of the White House had been transformed, rows of chairs, polished floors, brass instruments warming up. I stood in a waiting chamber with 3 other honorees, all men, all older. They nodded at me with quiet respect. I could hear the murmurs beyond the door. Then I saw them. My family sitting in the back row. My father in a dark suit, hands clasped. My mother looking uncomfortably out of place. Mason fidgeting with his tie, his eyes scanning the room like a deposition was about to begin. None of them saw me standing just a few feet away behind the curtain. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed them to. This moment belonged to me. To the men and women I'd carried, patched, lifted, stabilized. To the nights I spent writing letters home for soldiers who never got to return. To every second I bled beside them in silence. A voice came over the speaker. Please rise for the President of the United States. I adjusted my uniform, took a breath, and stepped forward into the light. The lights were warm, soft, but everything felt razor sharp. The edge of my collar, the burn in my leg, the weight of the metal rack on my chest. The President entered. The room rose. He walked with slow authority, his presence commanding the air like gravity. He shook a few hands, then stepped up to the podium. A military aide began reading the citations. One by one, the other honorees were called. Decorated Marines, a Navy EOD tech who had defused 4 live IEDs, a fighter pilot who pulled a wounded wingman out of burning wreckage. Each story drew applause. Proud families dabbed eyes. Photographers leaned in for every handshake, every smile. Then my name. Sergeant Grace Whitmore distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct during Operation Hollow Echo. The aide's voice rolled forward, measured and formal. Following the downing of her aircraft, Sergeant Whitmore, despite sustaining injuries to her own leg, provided life-saving emergency treatment to 6 wounded teammates under direct hostile fire. I stood tall, chin up, eyes forward, initiated an improvised evacuation protocol, and successfully led the movement of wounded personnel across 10 kilometers of hostile terrain. Her actions led directly to the survival of multiple U.S. service members and contributed to the extraction of 22 Allied hostages. The room was dead silent. I didn't look at my family, not yet. Then the president took the podium. He glanced down at his notes, then looked up, and paused. The official citation doesn't tell you what it feels like to watch a medic crawl through gunfire to reach a dying man while her own blood soaks her boot. It doesn't capture the nights she stayed awake beside her patients, not because she had to, but because they needed her heartbeat to hold on to. I swallowed. Hard. What it also doesn't say is that one of those hostages was a humanitarian worker named Claire Wexler, my niece. Gasps fluttered through the room. I've seen photos of her being carried to safety, stabilized by the medic who wouldn't quit, who wouldn't stop, even after being wounded herself. He turned to face me. Grace Whitmore, you didn't just save your teammates. You didn't just serve with honor. You reminded us all what quiet, relentless courage looks like. Then he stepped forward and saluted me. The flash of cameras was immediate, but everything else froze. Behind him, I finally turned and saw my family. My mother's hand covered her mouth. My father's face had drained of all color. Mason looked like he'd just been cross-examined and lost. They had never heard this story, never known who I really was, because they'd never asked. When the president placed the Distinguished Service Cross over my neck, it wasn't just the weight of a medal, it was years of silence, ache, and invisibility collapsing into validation. Afterward, during the reception, generals approached me, cabinet members, families of rescued hostages. One woman, early 30s, kind eyes, embraced me and whispered, "You saved my sister. She told us what you did, that you didn't sleep, that you wouldn't leave anyone behind." I smiled and nodded. The emotions were starting to rise, but I held them back. This wasn't about pride. This was about truth being seen, finally. Then I saw them. My family, huddled awkwardly near the back wall. They hadn't moved for most of the event. They looked like they didn't know how to. My father approached first. "Grace," he said quietly, his voice brittle. We didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't want to know." He winced. "I've been in boardrooms my whole life," he said, eyes flicking to the generals around me. "I've never earned the kind of respect I just saw you receive." He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Then my mother, still dazed, stepped forward. "I always thought you were running from something." "I was running towards something," I corrected. She nodded. "You were. And I couldn't see it." Mason didn't say a word, just extended a hand. I shook it, briefly. I turned to leave, needing air, needing peace. Then a familiar voice behind me. "We're gathering at O'Malley's after this. Real celebration. No politics, no press, just the people who know." It was Corporal Reyes, one of the medics I'd trained. My family was still standing there, uncertain. I looked back once more. "You're welcome to join," I said flatly. "But this isn't for you." Then I turned away. As I walked out of the White House, the weight on my chest wasn't just a medal. It was a line in the sand. I had been labeled worthless by people who never saw past the surface. But the most powerful man in the country had just told the world the truth. And for once they had no choice but to listen. 6 months later, my life looked different. I had accepted a new assignment as an instructor at the Army Medical Department Center, teaching combat medicine to the next generation. Instead of crawling through dirt under fire, I now taught cadets how to perform field surgery in simulated chaos and how to stay calm when someone else's life depended on their hands. It wasn't quiet work, but it was purposeful. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in my own skin. My students called me Sarge, with admiration. Fellow instructors deferred to my field instincts. And when new cadets arrived trembling with nerves, I told them what I'd learned the hard way. It's not the medal that makes you matter. It's what you do when no one is watching. It's who survives because you didn't quit. My family? They tried. My father emailed me articles about veterans' healthcare initiatives. Once, he showed up at a medical conference where I was speaking, sitting in the front row in silence. Afterwards, he said, "You were remarkable." That was all. My mother sent care packages for the first time: protein bars, socks, books she thought I'd like. She even included a copy of my White House photo in a frame that read, "Proud of you." Mason, surprisingly, joined a legal aid project that supported veterans. We talked more, mostly in short messages, but they came with less sarcasm, more sincerity. I didn't rush forgiveness. I didn't need to. The distance between us wasn't bitterness anymore, it was a boundary. One that protected the version of me I had fought to become. During a Thanksgiving visit home, I found something unexpected. In the living room, next to Mason's law diploma and my father's framed newspaper interviews, was a small display case. Inside, my Purple Heart, my Distinguished Service Cross, a photo of my unit, and, tucked in the corner, a folded letter, the one the president had read at the ceremony. I stood in front of it for a long time. "Your mother made that," my father said from the doorway. "She didn't ask, just did it." I nodded, quietly grateful, but also at peace, because it no longer defined me. That night, as I watched the next wave of cadets run drills under floodlights, one young soldier pulled me aside. "Ma'am," she said shyly, "I read about you. You're the reason I joined." I smiled. "I'm glad. Just remember, it's not about proving them wrong, it's about saving someone right." And as I walked back toward the training field, I realized something. The president's words didn't make me brave. The medal didn't make me worthy. I had saved others. But long before that, I had saved myself.